when I first came on board here at City Life Church, I actually applied for the role of a network pastor. And a network pastor is someone that looks after life groups, pastors people during the week, does that long-term sort of journey with them. And so originally I applied for that job. I had a phone call from a very excited young man called me and said, "Hello, Brisita." It was Daljit on the phone. And I was like, who is this guy? And anyway, so I was asked if I wanted to apply for this job in Melbourne, and I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's apply for it. So I went for the job, and I went through the whole process. I was like a 2-hour interview with you on the phone. Remember that? And and Dowja asked me some really hard questions, and went through the whole process, and then eventually it got to the part where they asked for my references. And when they ask for your references, you've made it. You're just like, I'm in. They're just going to check that I'm not crazy, and, I'm in. So I gave them my references, and then a couple of days later, I got a text message from our previous senior pastor, Andrew Hill, and all it said was, "There's been a problem with your references. Call me immediately." And I was like, oh my goodness. What has happened? And I'd put down my previous senior pastor from my church in Perth. His name's Tim Healy. He'll be here later on in the year to preach. And so I put him down as my reference, and I thought, what did Tim do? And I just cast my mind back to my time working at Riverview Church, and I loved Tim, and Tim and I got along really well, and he knew that I was applying for this job. We'd spoken about it, so I didn't know what was going on. And I remember when I left there was a particular pair of scissors that I had grown very fond of over the 6 years that I worked there, that I guess when I church me, I took them with me. And I thought, did he find out about the scissors? Is that what this is about? So I called Tim straight away. I didn't call Andrew. I actually called Tim straight away, and I was like, what did you say? Like, what did you do? And Tim was like, look, just calm down. It's not about the scissors. Don't worry, you can keep those. And he just said, I talked to them about the role, and I said, look, she can do that job. But if you have a job where she can work with young people, she's very good at that. So if there's an opportunity for her to work with young people and lead young people, then, give her that job. And they did. They had a young adults pastor job going. And so that but in the conversation, that moment that he stepped in, just changed the course of what I ended up doing here in Melbourne. And me coming to Melbourne, I ended up interviewing for the young adults pastor job. I had to go through the whole process again, interviewed for the young adult pastor job. And then I was like, why did I want to work with adults? What was I thinking? At the end of it, I was like, I love young adults. It's fantastic. So here I am working with young adults. And that's how it happened. Sometimes when God intercedes in our lives, when he steps into places, when a but moment occurs, your whole life can change. Your whole life can turn around. And my message today is entitled, But with God, there's more to the story. There's more to the story. Turn to the person sitting next to you and say, there's more to the story. There's more to the story. So we're exploring the theme of superordinary heroes and looking at these heroes of the faith. And we're really doing character studies. So, looking at their whole life and the lessons that we can glean for their life. And Moses had a very long life, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to touch on as much parts as I can in 30 minutes. We often find ourselves in situations that we don't always wish we ended up in. Sometimes the but that happens in our life can be really good. Something comes in and we're just like, wow, that was so much better than I thought that it would be, like working here in young adults. That's fantastic. But there's other moments in our lives where there's a but moment that intersects in our life and things go in ways that we didn't expect them to turn out that way. We didn't hope that it would turn out that way, and we can look at the situation in our lives and think, how did I end up here? I know some of you, every Monday you drive to work and you think, how did I end up here? How did I end up here? There's these moments in our lives where things happen and it's not what we expected. Life hasn't turned out the way we expect. And as Christians, we often find an internal grapple of knowing that God is almighty and amazing, but also looking at our circumstances, looking at our situations and thinking, it looks anything but almighty. It looks anything but amazing. And this is a part where I really fall in love with Moses in the Bible. This is what I love about Moses, is that he was this ordinary guy who found himself in extraordinary circumstances, who embraced the almighty nature of God. When life didn't turn out the way that he thought that it would, he then embraces the character of God, embraces the possibilities with God. And we see his life transform and change. And in doing so, he impacts so many other people's lives. You know, Moses, he was born a slave under the rule of the Egyptians. Like we've heard this story before. He was meant to be killed at birth, but his mother put him in a basket and then sent him down the Nile River. Do you remember this story from kids' church? You know, they put him down the Nile River, and he's in there. He's just a baby, and the reason they've done that is because the Pharaoh at the time wanted all male Hebrew children to be killed as soon as they were born. So Moses escapes his fate, and he's rescued by his mum, and eventually this basket floats down the Nile and it comes across the princess. The Pharaoh's daughter sees it. She opens it up, and lo and behold, there's a cute little baby inside. And she's like, I'd like one of those. So she keeps him. And then she raises him in the palace. So he's got this like amazing opportunity. He's born into slavery. He's meant to be killed. But instead, he finds this incredible favor as a baby, and he's raised as a prince in this palace, while everyone else that's like him is raised as a slave, is raised in poverty, is raised with no rights and no freedom. See, Moses, he was a Hebrew person, but he wasn't a Hebrew. He wasn't raised like a Hebrew. He was given more opportunities. He was given more possibilities. And the Bible indicates to us that Moses knew that he was Hebrew by birth, so he was aware of his faith. And we read that it all comes to a head one day for him. He goes out one day to where his own people were, and he watches them hard at labor, and we're going to read it together. And it says, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them in their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" And the man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known. Even though I looked to the left and to the right, it's become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. I wonder if you've ever had a moment like this in your life. This moment where you've gotten so angry, where you've gotten so frustrated, where you've gotten so bitter, and just in a moment you've lost everything. You've lost everything, because this is exactly what happens to Moses in this moment. His life is an absolute wreck here. He's murdered someone, and he has this life that was like full of luxury, full of possibility, full of potential and promise that no one else of his type had the opportunity for. And in a moment of madness, in a moment of fury, he snaps and he loses everything. He loses everything. We read from there that Moses, sitting at this well, he meets his wife by rescuing her and her sisters from an attack by shepherds. And he continues to live in this desert, some scholars say for 40 years, just living in the desert. But one day he's out there tending his sheep, and he sees this bush that looks like it's on fire. But it's not burning up, and out of nowhere it starts to speak to him. It starts to say things to him, and it's God. And God is saying to him, like, "Moses, I'm calling you to lead my people out, of poverty, out of slavery, and I'm going to get you to be the revolutionary that I know that you can be, and you're going to set them free." And Moses is like, "No, like, you have picked the wrong man for this situation. You have picked the wrong man." Eventually Moses is convinced, and he goes off to the Pharaoh. And he says to the Pharaoh, "You got to let my people go." There's a lot of debate. They go back and forth. He goes there quite a few times. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. Things fall out of the sky. Water turns to blood. It's pretty crazy. Read about it in Exodus. And then eventually the people are let go of slavery. And, he goes from this place of just like possibility to this place of absolute darkness, to this place of possibility again, because then God intersects in his life. Do you see how God meets him in this moment? But with God, there's possibility there. The life of Moses teaches us that even the things of your past can derail you, that even though the things of your past can derail you, but with God, your past is given purpose. Your past is given purpose. Moses was born a slave, he's cast out as a murderer, but that his past gets redeemed and it's given a new purpose. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not a message saying that it's okay to sin. Just want to make that clear. That's not what this message is about. Okay, there were consequences for Moses' sin. He had to live in the desert for 40 years. And, we read that there's consequences throughout his life. He lost everything. He had to rebuild his life. Later in his life, we find out that he disobeys God. And because of that disobedience, because of that sin, he doesn't get to enter the promised land. There are consequences to sin. But with God, there's always an opportunity for redemption. There's always opportunity for renewed purpose. And you see this renewed purpose in Moses' life time and time again. Even before we see the miraculous happen, we see that God is working in the purpose that he has given Moses. Moses' name literally means drawn out. Drawn out. See, he's given a purpose from his birth. He's drawn out of the water. He draws out his wife from being attacked. He eventually draws out the Hebrew people from slavery and helps to set them free. He is one that draws out. He is inherently a rescuer. The purpose of his life is not lost because of the mistakes he's made. In fact, when he encounters God, God is able to use his past and give it a new purpose and restore that purpose to him. And his past should have limited him. But with God, your past can have a purpose. And you know what? That's because we serve a God that doesn't define us by our past. Who's grateful for that, hey? How amazing is that? God doesn't define us by our past. And just like Moses, we all have a divine purpose that God has put in front of us, that God has for our lives. And you might be here today, and you might be thinking, I don't think that God can use me. I don't know if I've got it right enough, if I've done the right thing enough. I don't know if God can do that. But I want to tell you today that God has a purpose for you, just like he had a purpose for Moses. And you can reconcile and he can restore that purpose to your life today. It's just up to you to take a step and go towards him, and he can take that past and give it purpose. He can take that mess and make it into a message. That's who he is. That's who our God is. I do get it though sometimes. Sometimes we have things in our past that we carry with us, and they change the way that we see ourselves, and they can change the perceptions that we have about ourselves. We have a perception about ourselves sometimes of being worthless, of not being enough, or not being forgiven, or just not being able to do the things that God has for us. But I believe that with God, your perceptions can be replaced with promise. Your perceptions are replaced with promise. I don't know if you've ever come across a situation in your life where you've felt uncertain about yourself, where you felt uncertain about the possibilities of who you are and what you can do. I've recently gone back to study. I'm studying a master's in leadership. And I was pretty confident when I started. I was like, I'm smart. I've got this. I just did my exam the other day. There was 7 questions. I knew one of them out of 7. That's not good odds. I believe in miracles. So I'm praying, but it was tough. And I really should have got the hint that maybe I really feel like out of place in this course in my very first tutorial. So we have these tutorials. It's an online class. And so you log in on the computer and you see all these screens come up with different people's faces. And my very first tutorial, I log in, and everyone on the screens is like older men wearing suits with like ties and stuff. And I look like I just picked up a $2 t-shirt from Kmart, so I do not look like I fit in. I just come from the gym, so I was kind of like trying to lean out of the screen and put food in my mouth, and then like lean back in and I was like trying to keep it together, look professional. And the first class, they asked us to go around and say, what do you do? So what your role is, and something that you had been working on that day. So these people are like important people, right? So they're all going around and they're just like, oh, I'm the CEO of this not-for-profit, and we cured cancer today, and it's really intense stuff. Or like, I'm the CFO, and we're just trying to work through some funding issues we have at the moment for our not-for-profit, and that's so we don't have to lay people off with redundancies and all of this like big stuff. And it's like getting closer and closer to me, and as it's getting closer, I'm like sweating. I'm like, I've stopped eating. I've lost my appetite. I'm just like, what am I going to do? What am I going to say when it gets to me? Like, I'm not qualified for this sort of stuff. And it gets to me, and I'm just like, oh, well, I'm the young adults pastor at a local church, and today I helped someone break up with their boyfriend via text message. That's what I do. That's part of my job, like helping them live their lives. And cool, let's move on. So they moved on to the next person real quick. And I was like, I don't think I belong here. I don't think I'm the right person for this role, for this study, for this course. And I think Moses was a lot like that. He had these perceptions about himself where he felt like, I'm not the right person for what God has called me for the purpose that God has for my life. He didn't feel he was right for the job. He had this moment with God where he just was like full of excuses about why he couldn't be called by God. And it is like pages and pages of excuses. It's great. Here are my top 5. The first one was he didn't think he was qualified. He didn't think he was qualified. In Exodus 3:11, God says to him, so now go. This is like a big moment. He's like, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Like, who am I? I'm like this guy, he's just in the desert. He got kicked out of Egypt and they don't like me there because I murdered someone. Like, who am I to go and do that? The second thing is that he didn't think he knew enough. He didn't think he knew enough. In Exodus 3:13-14, it says, Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites. He's starting to negotiate here, Suppose I say to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to Israelites. I am has sent me to you. I am? I'd be like, really? Like, I am? You go to the Pharaoh, who sent you? I am sent me. Do you know who that is? So and Moses is like, what am I going to do? Like, he doesn't think, he just like, I don't know enough about who I am is. He didn't think anyone would believe him. In Exodus 4:1, it says, Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? I want you to notice here that we've gone from chapter 3 to chapter 4. We've gone through a whole chapter. We're onto our second chapter of excuses now, okay? Moses had a lot of excuses. No one's going to believe me. Next, he didn't think that he had the right skills. It says, Moses said to the Lord, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. A lot of scholars think that Moses actually had a speech impediment. So he might have been had a stutter or something along those lines. And it says, the Lord said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? And I love this because I feel like God is just like, we're done, Moses, with your excuses. He's like, hand on hip, and he's just like, who gave you your mouth? Who put that mouth on your face, Moses? Like, I know how it works. Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Come on, now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. And God is like putting his foot down. And yet Moses comes back because he doesn't believe he's the best person for the job. And it says, but Moses said, pardon your servant. Just one last thing, God. Please just send someone else. Just send someone else. I don't want to do it. I'm out of excuses. I just don't want to go. Moses, he just had no faith in himself. He had just no confidence in himself and what God could actually do with him and his life. He just didn't have that. And Moses' excuses as to why he is initially unwilling to step into what God has purposed for him stems, I believe, from that initial question that he asks, who am I? Who am I? Let's look at that again. It says, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Who am I that I should be listened to, that I should have any authority, that I should be able to speak boldly, that anyone should care what I have to say? Who am I? And I think that maybe if Moses had still been that young man that was living in the palace as a prince, maybe he wouldn't have had those excuses. But instead he's this 80-year-old man looking after not even his own sheep. They're his father-in-law's sheep. He doesn't even own sheep. He doesn't own anything. And he's looking at his life, and I think he probably thinks he hasn't really made much of himself since then. Moses is an outcast. He doesn't belong with the Egyptians. He doesn't belong with the Hebrew people. And he was once this man who was destined for greatness. But those dreams, those visions, that confidence that he had, died with his youth. Died in that moment that he left that splendor of his youth. And now he looks around and he thinks, who am I? Who am I? He just had the wrong perception of himself. He had the wrong perception of himself. But with God, God gives us a new perception about ourselves. He can give us a new perception about who we are, about the possibilities of our lives, about the possibilities of our future. You don't have to accept the things that have been spoken over you, or the words that have been labeled on you, or the things that you have caused yourself to believe about yourself because of things of your past. You can step into the fullness to declare that I am a child of God and everything that comes with it, because that is who you are. That is the reality of who you are. Because with God, we can get the right perception of ourselves. Moses saw himself as nothing, but with God, he was a revolutionary. He may have seen of himself as nothing, but God gave him everything he needed to do everything that he wanted to do and needed to do to bring the people out of slavery. You know, we're all given a choice as how we respond to the who am I question. We're all given a choice as how we respond to that. You can look at yourself and you can be consumed by the things that have been said about you or the dominating culture around you, much like Moses did. You know, when he's sitting there in the desert asking, who am I? Or you can choose to walk in your authority of one of God's own people. You can choose to walk in that authority, which is what Moses had to learn to do. You can imprison yourself to the things that have been spoken over you, or you can release yourself into all that God has for you. The answer to the question, who am I, is found in who he is, who God is, and who you are to him. I'm going to say that again because I think it's really important for you guys to get it. The answer to the question of who am I is found in who he is and who you are to him. You know, when you walk in relationship with God, he takes your perceptions of who you think you are and he replaces them with promise, he replaces them with possibility, and he replaces them with the correction that you are a child of God and you can walk confidently in that. You can walk confidently in that. And finally, I want to say what we learn from the life of Moses is that even though we may face major obstacles and struggles in our lives, we can say, but with God, he makes the impossible possible. He makes the impossible possible. You know, Moses, he had a whole bunch of excuses, and they were good excuses. I mean, they're not bad excuses. I feel like he was arguing with someone that was probably just a bit better at it than him, you know. But Moses, you know, from the moment he's called by God over and over again, we see this possibility in his perception about things and his outlook on life. When he sees that burning bush, he's intrigued by it. He wants to go and check it out. In Exodus 3, it says, Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. I love that. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, when he saw that Moses was willing to go and look, was willing to explore, was willing to see the possibility, then God spoke to him about possibility. It's when he was willing to go over to look, when the Lord saw. You know, if we want to see the greatness of God, and I believe that we do, we need to believe in the awe-inspiring nature of God. We need to believe in the awe-inspiring nature of God. You know, Moses could have just left that bush burning there and think whoa, that's kind of weird, but I'm not going to bother checking it out. Or I'm just going to get curious enough just to go and have a look. And whoa, God spoke to me, but I'm not going to go and do anything about it. But instead, he embraced the possibility of what is possible with God. He stepped into it despite his fear, despite his reservations, despite his past, despite his perceptions. He stepped into something with God and he had the curiosity to go and see it and the hope in him to believe that God could move in the impossible. You know, so many of us, we love to get close, enough with curiosity. We love to see the things of the Spirit move. We love to see healings. We love to see miracles. We love it. But, I think we need to do more with what we have seen. We need to do more in what we see. Imagine if Moses, he had just seen it and it was just this cool story he told people about. Oh, this one time, I saw this burning bush and, it told me to take my sandals off and I've lost my sandals and I don't have my sandals anymore. And, his friends are like, yeah, you've told us the story before. And that was just it. That was his life. You know, and that's how we treat sometimes the things of God, the things that we've seen God do in our lives and in the lives of other people. And we actually need to take that and do something more with it, because I believe that God wants to show us more. He wants to show us more. I have this statement in my house, and I look at it every single day. It's on a board at the front of my house, and I see it every time I walk in and every time I walk out. And it says, in 2019, I want to be captured by the wonder of impossible promises coming true. I want to be captured by the wonder of impossible promises coming true. And I pray, that is going to happen. I pray it for my friends who are struggling with fertility. I pray it for my friends, and even myself, who's struggling to find a partner. I pray it for my friends who are struggling to find a job, who are struggling to find purpose. I pray it over my life when I believe maybe I'm not enough. Maybe I just, I'm not the right person. I pray it because I want to believe in the impossibility. I want to believe that God can move in the impossible, and I want to be captured by that wonder. Because I believe that that's what God calls us to live in that place. And I believe that's what Moses got the opportunity to live in. He got to see the incredible things of God. Amazing stuff happened. We saw the ocean, he saw the Red Sea part, and he saw food fall out of the sky so it would sustain people. He saw people walk through the desert for 40 years and their clothes never frayed, and they were provided for in this time. He got to actually see God, he actually got to see God and get the 10 Commandments, all these amazing things that he got to experience with God. And it's because he looked for the opportunities to see God. He was willing to look. He was willing to see. He was willing to go with what God had put in front of him. So here's the thing, church. What are we going to do about the situations we face in our own lives? The good, the bad, the ugly. What are we going to do about them? In Moses' life, we constantly see God turn a hopeless situation into one of hope. We constantly see God turn a no into a yes, turn the impossible into a possible. And Moses is faced with situation after situation where the odds are so stacked against him. But with God, so much is possible. And I wonder, what sort of areas in your life today do you need a but with God moment? What sort of areas maybe where you're needing to say, but with God, I'm believing for more. I'm believing for more. Because there's always more to the story when God is in your corner. There's always more to the story when God is in your corner. There's always more when God is fighting for you. There's always more when God is writing your story. We can accept the situation that we're facing, or we can declare, but with God. Will we be a people that look at the state of our lives and just accept it for what it is? Or will we be a people that believe in a God that works in the impossible and declare that but with God, there's more to the story? We can look at failed marriage. We can look at loneliness. We can look at grief. We can look at finances that are just not going well. We can look at depression. We can look at loss. We can look at challenges at work. We can look at that child that has walked away from God. And those things, they suck. They're horrible. But with God, the whole thing can turn around. But with God, it might not look like what you expected it to. It might not come about today or even tomorrow. Sometimes it might not even come about in the physical world. But with God, there is hope for a restored future. There can be joy found in the trouble. There can be provision where there is lack. There can be peace found even in the most heartbreaking of circumstances. And I wonder, what sort of areas do you need a but with God moment? What sort of areas maybe have been a little bit ordinary, have maybe been a little bit heartbreaking, have maybe been a little bit difficult? And today you need to declare, but with God, there's more to the story.